Hi, guys. Welcome to Abuse Recovery Success, a podcast that we hope can help you find your light on the other side of darkness. Today, I have a fantastic guest for us, Corey, who's going to share his story of strength and hope with us. I am so excited to meet you, Corey. Welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I didn't actually give them any specific description of you, Corey. I think I'm going to let you take the floor and tell the listeners all about who you are. Have at it.
Sure. So currently I live out in the Seattle area. My wife and two kids. We've been out here for about 3 years, but originally my wife and I are both from Lincoln, Nebraska, so back in the Midwest. My story starts, for what we want to get into today. My story starts with the fact that I was an athlete. I was a baseball player through high school, college, and then professionally. And I had my whole identity wrapped up in that. That's who I was, and that's how I found my value. And in 2007, I was at the late stages of my professional career, and the door was closing. And one evening, I was at the plate, and I swung and I dislocated my shoulder. And when that happened, I found myself laying in the batter's box. And just so happened the ball went over the fence. So I don't have many home runs, but the ball went over the fence, and I was told, you need to get up and run the bases. And I was like, okay, great. And as I was making the way around the bases, like it kind of just hit me that like something obviously happened. My shoulder's not the same. And afterwards I saw the team doc, and it was apparent that I was going to have a surgery. And in the locker room after the game, a teammate of mine offered me a pill. He just said, I'm sure you're in pain and this will help. And I didn't think anything of it. I'd never thought of medicine as anything other than medicine before that moment. And I've had plenty of surgeries before, so this wasn't the first time. But I remember that evening after the game, an hour later, so after this pill kicked in, I'm sitting at home and the pain's gone, physically, but also, I was euphoric. I felt good. And just hours before, I had been devastated by what I knew to be most likely the end of my career. But it numbed me, and I didn't feel too bad. And that was the moment that this all started. This 10 years of basically kind of suffering through shame and darkness on my own. It was my own secret. And from that night on, it was kind of I like to explain it in a series of unfortunate events, I guess. That pill met me when I was at a low, and it provided me something to help cope. And after the season, I have surgery, more pills, and sadly, I'm kind of like, I know that these can help me with more than just the pain. And not too long after that, I was opportunistic about how I would get pills. And I had another back injury. And when a back injury I was wakeboarding, so I hurt my back. I was done with baseball, and I was prescribed more pain meds. And a back injury is kind of a free ticket to going in and being able to ask for pills, for opioids, because it's one of those things I think is really hard for medical professionals to diagnose as far as what kind of pain level you're in. And so therefore I realized I had a crutch that I could use to get these pills. And I was using them to continue to numb the end of my career, not knowing who I was, this transition into, regular life, the professional world, without ever really processing kind of the end of that. And soon after that, it became, I would be opportunistic, and I'd steal pills from family, from friends, from perfect strangers. And this whole time, that was my secret. Nobody knew about it. My wife and I had been married. At this point, we're married 16 years, but for a whole decade of me abusing opioids, nobody had a clue. And the reason for that was couplefold. One is I was really good at hiding it. Pills are really easy to hide. It's not like a bottle of booze. They're really small, and they can be hidden, and they're medicine. So they can kind of live out in the open or in a medicine cabinet, and nobody knows. Nobody knows that you'd be taking them when you're not supposed to be. And so that was one. The second thing is that I was so clean cut growing up. I mean, I grew up as this, I'm from Nebraska, an all-American kid who was really good at sports, really good at athletics, never drank in high school. I drank one time in high school, never again. I rarely drank in college. I was really, sports are everything to me. And so even if somebody, including my wife, which is just crazy, I know like for listeners here that my wife had no idea, is probably crazy, but even if somebody had an inkling that something was up, it would be dismissed because of who I was and how people knew me. And because of that, man, there's so much shame involved in any of this addiction, of alcoholism, of any of those things. And you just dig yourself deeper and deeper into this shame cycle, where you're lying to everyone around you. You continually lie to yourself. It was a slow process, I think, and everybody's story is different when it comes to addiction. But initially, I didn't think I had a problem. Who thinks they have a problem initially? You can normalize things. You can say, well, I mean, I'm just taking it on the weekends. I'm using it like somebody would use a drink. And slowly over time, it would be more and more to the point where it wasn't when I just wanted to take it. If I had it, I needed to take it. And during that time, but it's a slow process. It's like seeing somebody that you live with gain weight, but you don't notice it because you're right there every day. And slowly it just became something that I couldn't control. And I always thought that maybe I could control and I could quit when I wanted to. But my God, I can't even count the number of times I told myself it was the end. And it was never the end because I couldn't keep that promise to myself. I'm a big believer in the fact that like keeping promises can build your confidence. Like keeping promises to yourself builds confidence. And I've realized that during that whole decade of me not being able to keep a promise to myself, like I wasn't respecting myself, and therefore it was doing the opposite. It was completely destroying my confidence of who I thought I was, who I was. It became like when I looked in the mirror, all I saw was this person drowning in shame and not knowing how to ask for help. And it was isolating. It was completely isolating. And I would say, it got to the point, like I said, initially it was pills here and there, and I knew that they would just help me cope. And I think, some of the lows, there's a handful of lows, and unfortunately not all the lows, or none of the lows got me to the point where I wanted to ask for help until the end, obviously. But, I stole my dog's fentanyl patch off of her leg after surgery and put it on myself in order to get a high. And I had no idea how those things work. So I Googled, to try and be safe. I don't know if that's even, that seems silly to say safe. And I remember, waking up completely sweating, and I had to leave for work the next day. And I knew my parents' house was empty and I couldn't function. So I went to their house and I ended up, going to the bathroom and just puking my brains out and feeling like I don't know if I'm going to stop breathing. Like my breathing had slowed down, and I just fell asleep on their couch. And I just remember my last thought being like, will I wake up from this? I don't know if I'll wake up from this. And nobody will know. And I think there's so many times in my life where I was like, nobody knows. So what happens if something really bad happens? And all of a sudden the person that everybody thought I was, they find out is a complete fraud because he overdosed. Corey Harrington overdosed. And that was, those thoughts would go through my head all the time. And in 2017, my wife and I, we went on an adventure. We've always been adventurous. Like I said, we've been married for 16 years and we have moved all over the place. And, besides this one secret, our relationship has always been freaking awesome. And we are best friends. We do everything together. Yet I had this secret that I couldn't tell her. And every night I would sit in bed for the good part of a decade, like, just tell her, just tell her. I'm sitting right next to you. Just tell her you need help. And it'd be on the tip of my tongue. And I just couldn't say it. I just couldn't say the words. And and so in 2017, we decided to go on an adventure with our kids. We have a kid who's 2 and 6 months old. We sell all of our stuff and we head to Puerto Rico, and we're going to go sailing through the Caribbean for a year or two. and we're there for 3 months. My wife, at the time we didn't know it, but as we worked through all of this, she was going through postpartum depression. We were both just shells of the people that we were. And yet neither of us talked about it. I mean, mine had been going on for a long time, but she didn't know what hers was. And we were just shells of ourselves. And 2 Category 5 hurricanes came through Puerto Rico, destroyed everything, destroyed all the islands near and far. And it made us pivot, and we had to figure out a new plan. And I had known I've been in medical device sales for almost 10 years now. And so we had to find our life again. And so I found a job out in Seattle. And at that point, my wife and kids are back in Nebraska as I'm coming out to Seattle with my brother to move us out here. And we get out here, and we unpack the U-Haul. We get moved into our house. And I woke up the next morning at about 5 a.m. and I didn't sleep. I'd been taking pills, and I was like, this has to be it. Like, I can't possibly ask my wife and kids to move to Seattle and she not know this. Like, how can I remove her from everything that she's her support system out here and not know this? So I was sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store waiting for the coffee shop to open. And I Googled a opioid hotline and called, and I was just in tears, bawling in my car in the middle of a parking lot, pitch black out. And somebody answers, and I just say, I just need to tell somebody I've been abusing opioids for 10 years. That's the first time I'd said it out loud. I never said it to myself. And I've obviously had those thoughts in my head, but I never said it out loud. And the gentleman said, okay, great. Where are you located? I told him where I was located. And he said, well, I'll transfer you to somebody who services your area. He transferred me, and the line was dead. And so I just thought, well, I just said it out loud. I have to run with this. I had the strength to say it. So I sped home to my house, woke my younger brother up, who's 10 years younger than me. And I just said, Casey, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something. And I'm just bawling. And he's obviously like, what's going on? And I just blurted out, Casey, I've been abusing opioids for 10 years. I need help. Like, I don't know what to do other than I just need to say it. And I need some accountability. I need help. And so that was the first time that I asked for help. And, and I felt guilty because my wife should have been the first one. My wife is the one who should have known first. And I had some guilt around that. But at the end of the day, after I flew home the next day and told my wife, and obviously there's so much more to the story of how you build a relationship again after some secret like that. But, my wife and I now say that, like, that was meant to be. He was the person who was supposed to be there in order for me to feel comfortable to just say it, to get help. Because at the end of the day, that was the most important thing. It wasn't about who found out first. It was who was there to help me when I needed it. So that's my story of basically 10 years of my life, compact.
Yeah.
There's plenty to it, but yeah.
What was, so you fly home, you tell your wife, and what's the process like I know some about coming out of, opioid addiction, but did you have to go to rehab? Did you do an inpatient, outpatient? What did you do to get clean?
So on the way home, like, obviously I'm on the plane thinking like this very well could be the end of my marriage. Like, might be the end of me seeing my kids. I don't know how she's going to react. So I actually told my brother, I said, you need to call Nikki tomorrow night at 9:00. If you haven't heard from me, if I haven't texted you and told her that I'm telling her what's going on, then you need to call her and say, Corey has something to tell you. Because I needed that backstop. I was like, I wanted to tell you for so long and I couldn't. So that conversation happens that evening till 3 a.m. And the next day we get up and we go to a therapist who's a family friend. We called. My wife's like, I'm not going anywhere until we go speak to somebody and try and wrap our heads around this. And so we saw him. He was amazing. He was amazing to be able to sit down and have us both just be heard, and for my wife to be able to voice all of her concerns that she had. This just happened. Like, this was just poured on her like a ton of bricks. Like, the weight was off my shoulders, and now I just placed it on hers. I felt so much relief about just saying it out loud and telling her I needed help. But now she has all this weight that she had no idea was there. So my recovery has been a process of therapy. I didn't check into rehab. It has been constant therapy and I had I just knew, I guess that once I said it, I had to be accountable to somebody besides myself, because I couldn't be accountable to myself, that like that's what I needed to do. I needed to say it out loud. I needed to have accountability and know that like other people know about this. You can no longer hide in the shadows. Like other people know. So you need to this has to be the end. And in my story, the end was 3 years ago now.
3 years ago. Let me ask you this, Corey. Were you physically addicted? Like, I guess that's where I'm going with that. Like, how hard was it to get off the pills, or did you taper off? Did you cold turkey? What did you do?
So it was a cold turkey, and I'm working through my therapist. And I think that this is there's such a big gray area in this in addiction and abuse of substances, that I'm okay being labeled either way, because to me, I don't care about the label of it. It does not bug me because I don't care about the label. I know that I was really high functioning. I flushed pills. I had detoxed myself at times in that 10-year period. The way that my therapist and I had, the way that she had told me is that, basically, like, if you're a high level, if you're functioning at a high level, like, I would consider you an abuser. And I was like, I don't care what you call me, but if I had these pills, I had to take them, and I was stealing them, and I was stealing them on a regular basis. And I was like, so I don't want to get like really caught up in the label of it necessarily. Sure. I didn't detox during that time. I had been supplementing with drinking here and there. And honestly, when I was on pills, I never wanted to drink, because the high I got from the pill was so much better than, for me, so much better than the drinking of the alcohol and feeling shitty the next day. Like, I was like, the pill is where it's at for me. I don't want to screw up how I feel based on supplementing this. So I mean, I was very high functioning. I kept a job. I never had, nobody in my life knew. I'm the only one who's just popping pills on a nightly basis, and nobody knows about it. I guess that's
And I appreciate your story, because, we have all kinds of guests on this show and episode, and this one, specifically, I like that we're talking about someone that, and I don't know all of your background or your childhood, but you maybe didn't have the trauma, and you had, just this event happen to you where you were exposed to these pills, and, the addiction can affect anyone. And it doesn't have to be that guy you envision, with the paper bag and the homeless, guy on the street. And I was talking about that previously, because I think, some people look at me and they think, okay, how could you be an alcoholic? But I am, and I was, and I'm in recovery for it. But tell us, what would you feel, because you mentioned a little bit about this, what would you feel stigmas around, whether it's specifically that type of addiction or addiction in general, are?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to your point about what people think when they think about a drug addict or an alcoholic, I feel like they think it's a choice, which I won't speak to you, but like you said, like, nobody would think that I would have had this problem. Like, nobody would have, and that it's a choice. I'm like, no, it does not discriminate. It does not discriminate based on anything. And the second thing about the stigma of it is that if you are in this darkness and this shame and suffering, and you can't find stories like yours, then you think you are all alone. And that's how I felt. Like, it's hard comparing trauma. I think and what I've learned is, like, it's a really, it doesn't serve anybody to compare traumas, because a trauma is a trauma. And to think that, like, that nobody else is out there suffering like myself, was completely crazy. But at the same time, all I could find was examples of professional athletes who had a big entourage of people getting help, a Brett Favre or something like that, or the guy on the street who just OD'd from heroin. And I'm like, I'm not those guys. I'm not either one of those guys. So so where do I fall in this, and why? Like, it's almost like more shame encircled me because I'm like, God, I have everything. I have a great life, and yet I can't do without this. I can't kick this. Like, what kind of piece of crap am I? And that's like the self-talk that brings you down into this hole of
shame.
and
Yeah. And that's
right.
what I want to talk about. So right now, Corey, that we have listeners from all different, life points, whether that's someone who's actively in addiction, someone that's been through trauma, but shame doesn't really know any different. And shame finds us no matter what we've gone through in life. And especially in moments where we're battling an addiction or we've let loved ones down, we haven't lived up to the persona of what we like to think we are, or who we think we are. So if there's a listener right now, maybe even with a similar story to you, but they're trapped in shame right now, what would you want to tell them or convey to them?
I mean, so a couple of things is, one is you are not your addiction. The person that you see in the mirror, like that is not all of you. Like, that is the dark thing that you can't say. But the moment that you say it out loud, like it loses so much of its hold on you. It's like the hardest thing to do, to say out loud and admit it to yourself. But the moment you do, like, it's almost it's lifted off of you. That weight is lifted off of you. Like, just say it out loud and admit it. And you will be met with more love and compassion than the fear in your head of being completely shunned by people. That's my experience, is that I couldn't come and ask for help. And I was so ashamed that my fear was that if I do, it is going to isolate me even more. And at the end of the day, coming out and telling people my story and asking for help has done nothing but bring people around me who care and love for me.
I love that. And you are not your addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And and this, I said it earlier, but you're stronger than you think. And by keeping promises yourself, small promises on a daily basis, like, you rebuild your confidence. So even if you are struggling that, like, one day at a time, 1 minute at a time, whatever it is, like, every time you keep a promise to yourself, you start to rebuild the confidence that you've lost over however many years that you've been, searching for yourself.
Yeah. A couple things on rebuilding. First and foremost, I love that you said that about keeping promises to yourself, builds confidence and things like that, because it does. I try to be a type of person that, whatever I say I'm going to do, I do it, because it's those small wins that have, systematically over the past several years of myself being sober have given me that confidence I certainly didn't have at the end of my addiction. So I think that was really poignant when you said that. And you know what? I think most people that know me now would say that I'm probably extremely disciplined and systematic, and that they can count on me to do whatever I say I'm going to do. And the funny thing is, when I was trapped in my addiction, that was the opposite of who I was. And it seems like that's the life that you've really built for yourself. So if you could share with the listeners because you were honest and open about, hey, I went through a long period of doing nothing but breaking promises. So if you could share with the listeners, like, what that looked like, just starting to slowly, inch by inch, keep those promises and build that confidence. Yeah. And then also talk about how you rebuilt some of those relationships that you felt, had secrets, because that secrets come with addiction.
Yeah. So slowly, well, not slowly, the moment that I said it out loud and the moment I asked for help, I literally felt like, there's nothing I can't do. This has been the thing that I've wanted to do for 10 years and I couldn't do it. And all of a sudden I did it. And as crazy as it may sound, like, that made me feel like there's nothing I cannot do. Like, that's the one thing I thought I'd take it to my grave. I thought I'd either overdose or die, and nobody would ever know about this part of me that was such a huge part of me that I had so much shame in. And now I can do anything because I've done the thing I didn't think I was going to be able to do. And so it started off, day in and day out with my wife. Like, the thing I say to her every morning is just like, in order for us to start building a relationship back, was I choose us. Every morning before I get out of bed and go to work, it was like, I choose us. And that just meant I choose my wife and my kids over all else. And that was like a daily reminder that I would just say to her. I mean, at first it's like, we need to have something that I know, like, that you hold us above all else. And so that's like the term we came up with. And so it's, I choose us. And from that, and building the confidence day in and day out of not taking a pill, not taking a pill, not taking a pill. All of a sudden, I started to do something that I couldn't do for 10 years again. So I'm building confidence. And then I come from an athletic background. And so I've always stayed active. But I thought to myself, this was about a year after I came to my wife, and we're on a adults only weekend.
Mm-hmm.
We once a year we go for a weekend away, and our parents watch our kids. Mm-hmm. And we were in Victoria, and we're at a hotel, and we were talking about our goals. And I told my wife at that breakfast, I said that I want to be an Ironman, and the Ironman is a race. It's an endurance race. But this was one of those hard things I've watched over the course of 15 years. I'd seen this on TV and been like, these are incredible people. It's amazing. I can't believe people can like swim 2.5 miles, bike 112, then run a marathon. And I kept thinking to myself, what's my excuse? Like, I'm a healthy guy who has an able body. And that's something I always wanted to do, yet I never had the balls to commit and do it because I had other things of importance, namely pills. Like that was the thing that was important. So that day I told my wife, I went up and signed up for a race. And from that moment on, I started a training program. And so for about 8 months, I set in place training for this race. And it was a day in and day out thing. And so I never missed a single session. And the best part about it for me to train for this race was the fact that I told myself, like, I don't want to do this with anybody else. I don't want an accountability partner. Like, I've just proven to myself that I can do anything by getting help with my opioid abuse. Mm-hmm. And so now I can do this, and I don't need anybody to say, hey, meet me at the gym or let's go for a run. Like, I can keep this promise to myself. And so for 8 months, I day in and day out kept a promise to myself. And, in November finished Ironman Florida. And that's something I never thought I could do, but by keeping promises on a daily basis and never missing it, like, I got there and finished the race. And like, that spoke volumes to me about what keeping daily promises can do and bring. And so I've kept that up. I mean, that's just a motto I have now of keeping daily promises. So fitness is a huge thing, I think for me, but I think for a lot of people, because it starts to create like the dopamine, like the things that make you feel good, like your brain can start to create those again. Because for how many months after I got clean of opioids, I was trying to find like the feeling of happiness, the feeling of joy, like those things were in my life, but I couldn't make the connection of like feeling that way. I just felt dull and dead. And I was like, will I ever feel that again? And the second part of doing something physical is not only does it, give you that chemical reaction to make you feel good about yourself, like it's also a very tangible thing. It makes you feel strong to feel strong, right? So like, you're doing things you didn't physically think you could do, and now you are just filling yourself with more confidence because of it. So I guess that's some of the promises that I keep and some of the ways I build confidence. And I know you asked me about how I build relationships then, so I'll go there real quick. But that was coming clean by being authentic, by like, I didn't have to. Being a high functioning addict was one thing I learned is maybe the reason I didn't see examples of myself out there is because I could have easily been done with this. I could have easily not said a word once I got over this, because who needs to know? Like, I have a professional life. I have a family. I have responsibilities. And I kept thinking, well, I don't have to say anything. Like, I can beat this and nobody else needs to know. And then that made me think, like, that's why I couldn't find my story. Yeah. Like, that's why I couldn't connect with anybody. And I felt so isolated and alone because if you don't have to say it to people, then maybe a lot of people think, then why say it? But after 2.5 years of talking to my wife, I was just like, I just feel like it's in my heart that, like, I have to tell my story because there's other people suffering in this gray area and they don't think there's anybody like them. And I was like my story can be the story that I was looking for. And so by telling my story to everybody, friends and family, like, that is being honest about that is like help to rebuild those relationships. And by being completely authentic, like, that's what a relationship is. Like, there's not even a relationship if you're not authentic. If it's not built on honesty, then the relationship's not real, because the person's not interacting with the real you. They're interacting with like the facade that you put up. And also weaknesses. And sharing your weaknesses and your struggles, like, that provides connection with people. And I've seen that time and time again in the last 6 months since I decided to publicly talk about my struggles, is like, my conversations aren't pleasantries anymore. My conversations are real conversations with people at work, at home. Like we can have really authentic and deep connection and conversations.
Yeah. I always encourage listeners, whatever that looks like for you, without putting pressure on yourself, if you can get moving, that's a really part of my daily practice, and it keeps me centered and grounded. And I think, to recap what you said on rebuilding relationships, that transparency, being open, being honest, allowing others to see that weakness within you. And I think for me, like getting out of shame was just to drop all the curtains down and be an open book. Because whenever you're walking around feeling like you're hiding something or people don't really know, that's where I found a lot of the shame. And if people were going to know, because for me, I don't know, I wasn't very high functioning at the end. For me, there were a lot of people that witnessed some of my antics towards the end of my drinking. And for me, it was like, well, if you're going to see that side of me, maybe you should see, for what I believe is the real side of me, because, you are not your addiction. And you mentioned that, like, you're not your addiction. And to think that you can take a poison into your body or a pill that alters you and think that that is authentically you is just a false statement. And
Yeah.
I love that you said addiction doesn't discriminate, because it truly doesn't. And many of us fall into addiction in different ways. But at the end of the day, having the network of recovery, utilizing things like this podcast, those are the things that, can help you get through that turning point. I want to talk, as we wrap up today, just a little bit about who you are today and, how you're looking to help people. I know you have a lot of aspirations. You have a professional life, a family, but who are you trying to be and who are you today?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I'm a husband and a dad.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the biggest takeaway of my story is going to be the fact that, like, I have a 6-year-old girl and a 4-year-old little boy, and they're not old enough yet for me to tell them this story, but this story will be the reason that we can talk about anything. Mm-hmm. That my daughter can come to me and tell me anything. Like when I tell my kids this story, they'll know that nothing is off limits, that there's nothing that we can't talk about, and there's nothing that's taboo in our family to talk about. Like, hard conversations will just be normal conversations. Mm-hmm. And so that's a huge thing. I'm passionate about telling my story now. I'm passionate about helping people, about making people not feel alone and isolated. So I've started sharing my story on social media, snippets here and there, in order to reach somebody who needs to hear it. And hopefully they reach out. And it's been crazy in the short amount of time that people in your life, or people not in your life that you didn't even know about, that will reach out and feel comfortable talking to you about things that they never would have in the past, and to help. It's like a full circle. Like, you feel like you're able to, like, have a conversation and help somebody who didn't know that they could talk to somebody. So that's my new mission. Mm-hmm. And it's also ironic, because the thing that was my darkest secret that I wanted nobody to know in my life, and I never thought maybe would, has now become this thing that has become like my purpose, and that I'm not ashamed to talk about, that I actually want to talk about, that I want to, like, go out and share the message. So it's almost just crazy, ironic, 180 degrees of, I didn't want anybody in my life to know this. And now it's important for me that everybody knows this, because there's so much hope that can be found in people's stories like yours and ours and other guests you've had.
I love that. So, Corey, how can they find you? If they want to follow you on social media and watch your trajectory, where will they look?
Yeah. I'm at Instagram at Corey Harrington anew. I'm on Facebook at Corey Harrington. Those are my two outlets. I only started sharing my story about 6 months ago. And so, I'm looking to do more, and I'm looking to partner with some people who, need to hear our messages. And, your platform is appreciated, because that's exactly what the kind of platforms I'm looking for in order to go out and make a difference and help somebody. So,
well, I love that, Corey. And I think you are going to be a really strong voice in the community of recovery. I really applaud you. And I mean, wow, an Ironman. I think that's definitely a first for me, somebody who's been through that. So thank you for sharing your story with the listeners. I plan on keeping in touch with you. Listeners, if you want to follow Corey, he gave you the info. We'll have some more info attached to this session as well. And if you want to find out more about Abuse Recovery Success, catch up. You can always catch season 1, 2, 3 on abuserecoverysuccess.com. You can find me at April_the_hills on TikTok and Instagram, and April Hill on YouTube. Thank you guys. Have a great day.